Hey, Dulles Church family, before we really get into this week's online gathering, I've got a couple cool updates to give you. First of all, you guys, all of us collectively, have really been stepping up to help our community in need. Various needs that our community's been facing. First of all, at the yoga sessions that Emily's been leading, you've been making food donations. Then on a larger scale, the event supporting the Dulles South Neighborhood Closet was a huge success, which contributed to and helped over 100 families in our area. And then, of course, the Rohr family lost their house 2 weekends ago to a fire. And their big request before their insurance really kicked in was gift cards to help with school supplies and food and some clothing. And right away, I think we were just shy of $1,400 came in from all of you, from us collectively, and those gift cards have been purchased and given to the Rohr family. Anyway, I just love the way you give, not only here to DCC, but to specific needs in the community. So way to go. We've been celebrating that here in the last couple of weeks. And then also, about 25 or 30 of us gathered last weekend for a baptism. And I loved this. I loved it. We got to cheer on Anna Stewart and Kim Pizzoli and Hudson Burgess as they professed their devotion and choice to follow Jesus with their lives. That's what this series has been about, really surrendering control of our life and giving Christ full control. And the three of them decided to do that, and there were a lot of cheers that day. It was a lot of fun. Hey, listen, if you've been thinking about it since my baptism message and you didn't respond, but you still kind of have it on your mind, you can reach out anytime through our website. If you're watching live here on weekends, you can click the connect button and you can email altonb@dulleschurch.org at any point to say, hey, I've been thinking about baptism. Could I talk to somebody about it? Anytime. Okay, enjoy this worship song together, DCC, and I'll be back in a few minutes with today's message.
You're never gonna let me down. 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 You're never gonna let me down.
You're good. Oh, you are good. Good. Oh, you are good. You're good. Oh, you are good. You're good. Oh, you are good.
You're never gonna let me down.
You are good.
You're never gonna let me down.
You are good.
You're never gonna let me down.
You are good.
You're never gonna let me down. You are good. You're good.
Oh, you are good. You're good. Oh, you are good. You're good. Oh, you are good. You're good. Oh.
Dulles family, so when I wrote this message, the thought crossed my mind that it may not only just frustrate some people, I might actually lose friends after this message. And the more I thought about it, I don't really think that's going to happen. I certainly hope not. We'll see. But I do believe this message is going to challenge the way a lot of us have thought about this year, about 2020. And that is what this series is about. We've been asking the question, what in the world? How do we define or even comprehend what has happened to our country, to our world? You know, just a couple weeks ago with the latest hurricane, we broke the record, the all-time record going back to the 1800s, and how many named tropical systems have made landfall in the United States. It was being asked again, like, of course, in 2020. You know, when else would this happen than this year? So we'll see how you interpret this. You know, I was tempted to joke that, you know, we'll lose some viewers going forward after this message. And actually, my prayer has been that we will gain viewers because of this message. So I'm going to start with a story about my grandfather. Growing up as a kid, my brother and I as kids knew that our grandfather had been in World War II. As the saying or cliche is, he had fought in World War II. Although we really didn't see him as a fighter or know any fighting stories, we had asked questions as kids as we became more and more aware of what war meant and what World War II was. He always seemed to be dismissive. He was always vague about his war experience. And then when my brother and I got to, I'm guessing about 14 and 12, somewhere in that age time frame, I remember being in his living room, my grandfather's living room, and it came up again, and we tried again. And one of us asked the question, Pop-Up, did you ever see anyone die? And instead of his normal dismissive way, he awkwardly told us yes, he had, and we just kind of freaked out. I remember, like, we knew there was a chance he'd seen someone die, but like, wow, you really did. And then one of us asked the question, did you ever kill anyone? And again, instead of dismissing it or blowing off the question, he just sat in silence. this time. And by not saying no, he was answering yes. And it was amazing to us that he actually kind of opened up. And as difficult as it was and emotional as it was for him, he told us some stories. And I remember he described being in the boat approaching Normandy Beach. And ever since this day, ever since the day my grandfather told us this, I've wanted to visit Normandy Beach, and I certainly hope to someday. The terror that he felt, and he said, oddly, it wasn't the terror of bullets or bombs, it was of the water. He couldn't swim. To the day that he died, my grandfather never learned how to swim. And his fear was that the gate, the door on the back of the boat would drop not on the sandy beach, but in the waves, and that's exactly what happened. He remembers being underwater, and he had no clue, no recollection of how he actually managed to get up onto the beach. A couple of remarkable things happened that he told us that day. One of which was later that night, as he was undressing, he noticed a bullet hole through his flap jacket. His outer shirt had an entrance hole and an exit hole. And we were just like spellbound at this thought. My grandfather was a humble man. He wasn't dramatic. He never sensationalized things. So we're taking this in like, Pop, what? And he said, well, that's not really the crazy part. After I took that off, I noticed that on my undershirt, my t-shirt, where the bullet hole was in the outer shirt was torn threads. And he checked, he wasn't bleeding, there was no mark, no cut, but the bullet had grazed his undershirt, which was up against his skin. And I remember sitting there in his living room as a 14-year-old, 15-year-old, just shocked. And I quickly went from, wow, my grandfather almost died, to kind of making it about myself, I guess. I remember quickly thinking I came that close to never being born. And in that moment and in the days that followed, and it was like I was a little bit in shock after hearing the story. I remember processing, wow, Hitler and the Nazi army suddenly had a personal effect on me. Until this point, they were always the really bad, awful people who did horrendous things to people groups a long time ago over there on the other side of the world, to people that I'll never really meet, and it's not going to really affect me personally. And on that day, when my grandfather told me the story, I realized, and again, I don't want to make this too dramatic. It feels dramatic in me that Hitler's army came close to wiping out my family, because this happened, 4 or 5 years before my mom was born. Okay, I believe one of the big challenges, one of the big flaws that we are making this year in this unprecedented year of 2020 is that we are wrongfully defining our enemy. I've kind of been noticing this and been writing about it here in, the last month or so, since I've been well and writing again. This is something that's settled in on me, and I think this is going to come up again here much later in the fall, closer to the election. I'm going to talk about this more. I believe we are perceiving people opposed to us as someone to draw a boundary line with and someone to be hostile with, when that's not God's heart for us. And I think it gets us all turned around, and it has us back in the mode of taking control. It moves us back into that template, that default that we've learned to be people who are in control and take control, rather than people who are surrendering control to Jesus. I believe people who stand opposed to us, even people who seem to be against us, are actually not our enemies. An enemy is a relative word. I mean, it's a word that we can, the trash man can put the trash truck in the street in the wrong place, and it's up to you. You could make that trash man your enemy. I mean, it really is relative, and it's up to you who your enemies are. And I want to talk about spiritually, rightfully defining who our enemies are. Because someone who's opposed to you, I mean, in today's culture, that quickly becomes your enemy. But that's just not the way we're supposed to think spiritually. Someone who's opposed to you is really an opponent, much like in sports. I remember in high school, I played 1 year of high school football and 2 years of high school baseball. And I went to James Wood. There were 2 high schools in Winchester, Virginia. James Wood, go Colonels. And then the arch rivals, our crosstown rivals, Hanley. Hanley High School was like, they were the ones we hated. We would say that. We would say we hated Hanley. I remember going in February into the gym for baseball practice when baseball was starting, and we would look at our schedule, the teams we're going to play, teams in the past who've beaten us. We want to get this one back, but man, we could lose to everybody, but we had to beat Hanley, and we hated their colors. We hated the players on their team, and same for football, And then some weird things would happen. Like in the middle of summer, my junior, or even after I graduated, my junior year or senior year, I remember being at an event or a party where some of the Hanley players were there and, we're kind of hanging out, or some of my friends would show up somewhere with Hanley players. And I realized, wow, they've got like a friendship. You can't do that. I remember thinking, you can't do that. They're the enemy. I mean, we called Hanley the enemy. And, then as a senior in high school, there were times where I realized wow, they like the band Rush just like we do. And, guys in the 80s were never allowed, never, ever allowed to admit they liked bands like Journey. I mean, I kind of like Journey, and a lot of guys did, but you just couldn't say so. And I remember going to a friend's house one day who went to Hanley. And he'd become a friend, and I walked in his house, and a Phil Collins song was playing. And I remember asking him, you're listening to Phil Collins? And he had tape recorded it on a cassette tape from the radio because he liked it, and I kind of liked it too. And I remember we kind of had this thing hey, don't ever tell anybody that we like a Phil Collins song. It's interesting how some of these arch rival enemies that you can't stand and you feel emotion against, you end up discovering you're worshiping with in church. Or your parents know their parents. It's interesting. It's amazing to me how we can call somebody like that, like a football opponent, our enemy. And we do this a lot, and we do it when we're emotional. And when the emotions calm down, we discover, well, I used to hate them. I used to hate Jimmy Johnson as the coach of the Cowboys. And hate is one of those words, you know what I mean. And then we watched him on Survivor years ago and kind of liked him a little bit. And I remember thinking, I'm not supposed to laugh at this, or I'm not supposed to like Jimmy Johnson. This is what happens often with our perceived or determined enemies. We make people our enemies when really they're just the opponent. Even the people who stand against us are not really our enemies. I want to talk about what our real enemy is. The person or the thing that you should draw a boundary with and put serious limits to in terms of protective limits is the person or the thing, anybody or anything that threatens threatens your physical health, your mental health, and particularly your spiritual health. Now, again, this is relative. I don't have time today to parse and really get into the nuance of how someone could threaten your mental health. You could say somebody looks at you funny at work and they're harming your mental health. This is really up to you. In a lot of ways, this is up to you. But the way God wants us to look at someone that really is an enemy is somebody who poses a threat to you or your family spiritually, like the spiritual health of you or your family, physical health or mental health. A better way to think about this is using the word toxic. When someone has become poisonous, when someone is toxic to your spiritual health or your physical health or your mental health. So I want to read to you from a place in Ephesians chapter 2 where Paul, the Apostle Paul, is addressing really this apparent enemy, someone that we're divided from. There is a great, clear, crystal clear division between you and this other side. And Paul tells us that Jesus has changed everything. I think a lot of us today see the Republicans as the enemy, or the Democrats as the enemy, or a political leader, or the president as your actual enemy. I'm going to go to social media as an example. Those of us who live here in the South Riding, Aldie area, we're familiar with a Facebook site, a community group site where complaining and critiquing openly in an embarrassing kind of way is kind of the norm on this site. To the person who left their car abandoned on the curb near my house, and it can be very hateful at times. I don't believe the person that left their car abandoned is your enemy, and you don't even know what happened in that situation. It's remarkable to me how many enemies exist in social media, where it's safe in your own house behind your computer screen to fire off missiles at people. I believe for a lot of Americans, coronavirus, COVID-19 isn't your enemy. It is the enemy of a lot of people. Unfortunately, this virus has been the enemy of many people. There's no doubt. It has posed a physical threat, a mental health threat, even a spiritual threat, you could say, to many, many people. Many people have lost their lives from COVID-19, of course. But I mean, you could say 99, that's still the number that's being, 99+% of Americans really are not affected dramatically by this virus. I'm not making a case about the virus as much as I am that we see as personal threats and become people who choose fear, or become people who become so vocal against someone with hostility that is actually not our enemy. So Paul's addressing this in a pretty dramatic way in Ephesians 2. And here's the background on Ephesians 2. Jews and Gentiles were as far apart as people groups as is probably humanly possible. We're in a very, very emotional year where a lot is changing in terms of diversity in America. There's been a lot of introspection and a lot of reflection, and I think there's a lot of interchange happening, particularly among the white community. I certainly hope so. It seems that is a part of what God's doing this year, of course. When you look back at our country's history at the hostility and the divide, the racial divide, I don't think it compares to the divide between Jew and Gentile in the first century, in Jesus' time, in the Apostle Paul's time. So what's happened is Jewish people who are perceived by Gentiles, the non-Jews, in the Roman Empire as the lowest class of humanity in the Roman Empire. Jewish people were looked down on as almost non-humans by many parts of the Roman Empire. And the Jewish people saw non-Jews, the Gentiles, as heathens, just so far from God, we don't even associate with them kind of thinking. And there was a lot of hostility. And in the days and weeks, the years following Jesus' resurrection, not only did 80, 90, 100,000 people in the city of Jerusalem alone become followers of Jesus, but there were more and more reports that Gentiles are choosing to follow Jesus. Gentiles are actually surrendering control of their lives to Jesus. And the early struggle here in this regard was that Jewish believers didn't think that was possible. Like, well, Gentiles can't become followers of Jesus because they're Gentiles. And as it became more accepted, the argument moved to, well, Gentiles can follow Jesus, but they must become fully Jewish. Full-grown men must be circumcised. All the ritualistic, ceremonial acceptances must be made by the Gentile believer. And so a council was formed. A council happened, the Jerusalem Council. You can read about it in Acts 15, where all the apostles, the early church apostles, gathered together to discuss this, and they decided, no, to follow Jesus, all you have to do, all anyone has to do, is surrender control of their lives to Jesus. Give control of their life to Jesus. Give their heart and their faith to Jesus. That's it. Jesus has done everything else. There's no ceremony, there's no ritual you have to perform to follow Jesus. That's the context out of which Paul is writing in Ephesians chapter 2. This is what Paul says. For he himself, he's writing about Jesus, for Jesus himself is our peace, who has made the two groups one and has destroyed the barrier, the dividing wall of hostility. He's saying that Jesus' death and resurrection has so much power, and the purpose of Jesus is so much at work here that the two groups, the Jews and the Gentiles, now can become one. And that's actually the purpose of Jesus. He goes on to say Jesus' purpose was to create in himself one new humanity out of the two. This is powerful language. The Apostle Paul is saying Jesus' purpose was to create in himself one new humanity out of the two groups, thus making peace. And in one body, to reconcile both of them to God through the cross, by which he put to death their hostility. Jesus came and preached peace to you who are far away, and peace to those who are near. All right, I'm going to just spend a couple minutes here breaking down some of this language. Jesus' purpose was to create in himself. Remember what Jesus created. This is revealed going into the Garden of Gethsemane, the prayer before Jesus' arrest and death, and then following his resurrection. Jesus' ultimate purpose was to create the church, to create a body that united together looks like Jesus. We're emulating Jesus. We're reflecting the character and love and mission of Jesus in this world. Jesus is constructing in himself. He's creating in himself one new humanity, Paul says, out of the two groups who were so opposed, culturally opposed, so different, so antagonistic against one another religiously and in terms of tradition. He is making these two groups one new human group that would be his body, the church, you and me, thus making peace. Remember what Irwin said. You know, I keep going back to this. It's the quote of the year. I've called it the quote of the year, where Irwin said, peace does not come because you finally have control over your life or you finally taken back control of your life. Peace comes when you finally in your life no longer need control, when you give up the need for control. Jesus is moving us in surrender toward him, toward this ability to be okay with people who have differences, who actually disagree with us about issues, even political issues that matter to our family or our school system. Jesus has created a movement called the church where what matters, what is primary to us, is so essential that these other things become peripheral matters. Who's president? And as much as we care deeply about immigration issues and financial, economic issues for our country, all of those things become secondary when you surrender your life to the mission of Jesus. And when Democrats who are passionate about their political convictions and Republicans who have their own passions and beliefs are surrendered to the mission of Jesus, those things actually become peripheral. You become people who can debate and actually disagree on these kinds of issues. And it really doesn't affect friendship and community and what we're doing for Jesus together because of what Jesus accomplished on the cross. And that's how he finishes. Paul finishes this text by saying, in one body, he reconciled both groups to himself through the cross, by which Jesus put to death their hostility. He came and preached peace to you who are far away and to those who are near, meaning to the Gentiles who were far away culturally and to the Jews who were close to where it all happened. You know, there are several scriptures that we're going to get into closer to election time where we focus on Jesus' passion. It was revealed before his arrest when he said, Father, In that agonizing prayer in the garden, part of that deep, passionate prayer was, Father, make those who follow me one. Unite them with all the different backgrounds, the different countries they live in, all of the different traditions that they come from. Unite them the way you and I are one. The way you and I, Father, are one. Make our church one. This started way back in Genesis chapter 1 in the creation story, where the Trinity is actively at work in creation. It's part of the creative story, where the pronoun we, let us make, the pronoun us, let us make man in our image, mankind in our image. The Father, Son, and Holy Spirit are designing humanity after God's image. And Jesus' prayer in the garden is make the church one, committed, first and foremost, seeking first my kingdom, people who would reflect me and my character, my love. What my intention is to bring back to life things that are dead, that they would walk in my power, unified in my power to take things that are broken and make them whole. See, when that becomes our mission, when that becomes primary to us, we can disagree on things on a national level and about economies and about schools. You can have strong convictions about what our school system can do and debate it and even argue it with your brother or sister who's following Jesus and walk out of the room hugging one another. We can't really hug one another right now. This is the unity that Jesus is calling us for. Paul uses this imagery when he calls the church one body. He uses the metaphor of a human body, and he says the eye can't say to the foot, I don't need you. In God's church, among followers of Jesus, each part is a necessary member of the body, and we need one another. We can't function without one another. So this is what I'm proposing to you today. Our enemy in 2020, in our country, in our communities, in our neighborhoods, I think our enemy, maybe among us as friends and a community of faith, is division. I don't believe it's a president. I probably get some emails from some of you about this. This is what I referred to in the beginning of my talk. I don't believe it's a political party. I don't believe the Democrats or Republicans are your enemy. I just don't. To my core, I don't. I don't believe it's worth getting red in the face about or clenching your teeth. I don't believe it's worth stressing about and keeping you awake at night. What happens to us politically? Do I care? Absolutely I care about this country and about our future. Of course I do. I care so much more about the power and love of Jesus being at work among us, spilling out to the world around us. That's what I'm passionate about. That's what keeps me awake at night. And I'm calling us to that. This really is not intended to be a political message. And the series this fall that I keep referring to in later October, just before the election and around the election, we're going to go through a series together that I'm working on. And some of this is going to influence that. I believe our great enemy today is division. I believe it's division. Division is our enemy. That is where we need to draw battle lines. And if there's emotion in our voices and our faces, it needs to be about division. We need to fight for our unity. This is what the Battle of Peace series was really all about. And the Way of the Warrior, it was a call. And I'm gonna keep at this call, and I'm gonna be consistent with it. God is calling us to fight for peace and to fight for unity. Let's find that by rallying around and centering our lives around the mission of Jesus, the call of Jesus, the love of Jesus to the brokenness in this world. Let's let political and school system battles and those kinds of things become secondary. You'll find yourself being able to debate and argue and still smile with and still worship with someone who's different than you politically when you are united with the person first and foremost because of what Jesus has done for you. He brought what is dead in you back to life. He takes what's broken in your life and has been shattered and remakes you into something beautiful. And now we are supposed to call others to that kind of experience. This is what I'm excited about going into this fall. This is what God is revealing to us in 2020. I know it. Let me pray with you about it. God, I pray that you use these words somehow, my words today. More importantly, you use your Spirit's words, your Holy Spirit's words in us to change us and to call us to surrender. God, you're calling us to surrender control, like real control on Tuesdays and Wednesdays, not just now. During the week, during work meetings, when we have tension with our neighbors on the street, when we're struggling as parents, you are calling us to be about your purpose first and foremost, to seek first your kingdom. I pray that we would be people who do that. I love you, DCC. I'm in this with you. Reach out and say hello. Take care of one another. When someone crosses your mind, email them, text them, call them. Let's be lovers and caregivers of one another during this time. I love you guys. I'll see you online this week.